right, what's good, everybody? For today, we're going to be reacting to Soccer Explained for Americans, specifically European soccer. I call it football, though, because that's obviously what the real name of it is. I've read a lot of the rules. I've watched a lot of games over the last year, so I have a pretty good understanding of a lot of different things, but there's still some rules here and there and some other things I could probably come to understand, but that's the entire goal of this video. So we're going to sit back, relax, and have the Europeans explain to us how this sport works. I hate watching soccer. They have to bring the stretch out at least 6 times a game.
So I've been wanting to start following soccer for a while now, but as an American, I always found it complicated. Not like how they play. Most 3-year-olds can kind of understand more or less how it works. I just mean how everything kind of works in Europe. You know, I would follow the World Cup, and I'd root for the United States if they made it. And then I'd root for Iceland because clearly they've all been practicing that clapping, and they're really good at it. But that only happens once every 4 years. So I turn on my TV, and it would be like a random game, like Parma versus Bologna. And first I'd make sure that I wasn't watching the Food Network, but then I had no frame of reference for this game. Like, are these teams good? You know, is this a big game? Which one of these guys is Pele? You know, I didn't know. And I had all these other questions, like, you know, why are teams getting kicked out of leagues? Why are they all rolling around on the ground so much? How are...
All right, the rolling on the ground part is funny. I do find it hilarious. Well, not hilarious, but that was one thing I did notice with this sport is the amount of, like, I don't want to really call it flopping because it sounds weird, but the amount of, like, people that will end up on the ground within seconds, like, I know they're trying to really draw the foul. That was something about it that I was kind of like, I get why that happens. I'm just not a big fan of it, you know, but I get it. There was a part he said in here earlier about like not knowing what teams are, or like what leagues and cups they play under. The moment I see a game featuring teams I do not know, I Google what league they're a part of. I actually have Foot Mob installed on my phone, so I can keep track of a lot of different leagues and all of that. So that's something I've been doing, researching teams that I don't know and watching more of their games.
Guys getting traded to different countries, and why does everybody in the stands have a scarf? So a few months ago, I tried to start figuring it all out, and I started watching some matches. That's the first thing. They aren't soccer games. They are football matches. And I bought FIFA for my Xbox, and I bought a scarf and a vuvuzela because that's like the rules or something. So anyway, this is all the info that I wish I'd known a year ago. This is my crash course of translating soccer into American.
Okay.
I'm going to assume that you kind of know the rules. The biggest difference between American sports is how offsides works and the clock.
Offside,
lots of people get upset about the clock. It goes up instead of down. Get over yourself. It doesn't really matter. Americans also get mad because the clock doesn't stop and games pretty much end whenever the ref feels like it. And you actually adjust to this pretty quickly. The game's an hour and a half long. You'll have your chances to score. And if you can't score, then it's not the clock's fault.
I mean, do people actually get upset about this? When I first started watching the sport, I was a bit confused on like how the clock system worked and how the refs like ended games, but it wasn't enough for me to be turned off from it. Like, do people actually get upset about that? I will admit, the only thing I do not fully understand is how refs determine how much time gets added. But the more that I've watched the sport, I could kind of guesstimate a little bit here and there when they were going to add like X amount of time for extra time at the end of a game based off of how many pauses we had during the match. So I've slowly adapted to kind of like being able to tell a little bit like when something's about to happen, I think.
Some people, and when I say people, I'm referring both to discussions I've had with other Americans as well as like myself 6 years ago. So people think soccer is too slow. And when Americans look at a soccer field, something in our minds, we think that it's like playing hockey or playing basketball just on a big grass field. And in those sports, guys like go full tilt a lot, like most of the game. So when two players are just standing there passing the ball back and forth, we wonder, like, why aren't they trying to move forward? Just go. And on the other side, we expect the defenders to be attacking the guy with the ball rather than just standing 5 feet back and letting him do what he's doing. The key difference is that soccer fields are football pitches are much larger than basketball courts and hockey rinks. And if you tried a full court press for the whole soccer game, you would be exhausted and you would probably lose. See, the pace of a...
All right, I'm not going to pause this much, I promise, but that was something I noticed the other day when I went to go play out on our local pitch was how big that field was. And I jokingly said in that video, I understand why a lot of players just end up walking a little bit, throughout the entire game instead of like running back and forth constantly, because that pitch is massive, especially on these professional games. It's huge. There's no way you can consistently run up and down those without being tired quickly. And then the slow part about the game is funny to me because I like the build up to how scores are or how goals are made. I have always thought about the fact that a lot of other sports do have a bit more of like an instant gratification thing to it. There are hype moments in the NBA where you get like certain 3-pointers or whatever. I think that's perfectly fine to get excited about. But I'm glad that this sport doesn't play like every other sport. I like the patience. I like the build up, and it makes it so when certain goals are made, it's just like, yes, yes. Like whenever I watch Columbus Crew or even Barca, certain goals, like the build up to it, it's enough to get me to stand up and go like, yes, let's go. You know what I'm saying? Like, I love that build up.
Game, you would be exhausted and you would probably lose. See, the pace of a soccer game is actually much closer to baseball. Most of the game is going to consist of guys just slowly passing the ball around, real peaceful, and then it's going to be all of a sudden followed by these short bursts of extremely fast action. Basketball players, it's estimated, run an average of 2.5 miles during a game. Soccer players can run 7, if not 10 miles during one game. And remember, you only have 3 subs games, so most of these players will be playing the whole game.
Oh, you only get 3?
One thing Americans will appreciate is that other than halftime, there are no commercials. So it's like the anti-NFL, which is great. Yeah. It also means that no matter where the ball is, both teams are always potentially about 30 seconds away from scoring, which creates this kind of constant tension. It also creates a scenario where you can't ever really run to the bathroom or get a drink. Soccer players seem to have a reputation for being lazy in the U.S. because they don't always pop right back up after going to ground and get right back into play. Certainly some players do embellish things and some go over the top, but I don't really
100%.
think that on the whole it's quite the issue that people make it out to be. So they get made fun of in Europe too. So here's a fun experiment to try the next time you have a few minutes. Go to like a local field and then quickly jog laps around that field for like 10 minutes. And then suddenly sprint down the middle of the field as fast as you can. And when you're halfway up the field, while you're still sprinting, have one of your friends just shove you over onto the ground. And if you can pop right back up and keep sprinting, then you can keep complaining about those guys.
Okay, but when you put it like that, it makes sense. There's a lot of movement going on. There's a lot of inertia, not inertia. There's a lot of force coming from players running into you at full speed. Okay, that like you said, some embellish it, some go over the top and make it way more exaggerated than it probably is in the moment. But that's a very good point. That's a lot of movement. You got a full-size grown man full sprinting at you and basically running you over. That's like getting hit by like a guy on a moped, probably. I don't know why I went with a moped, but whatever. That's a very, very, very valid point. It is funny that people will say they're lazy. The people who say players in like sports are lazy are the same people that go to McDonald's every day for the most part. Like, that's, how much physical strain this probably is on your body? And again, you get hit by another grown man running full speed, it's going to hurt.
A lot of the time, they're just taking a little rest. Everyone will either just keep playing around them, or both teams will be a little tired, so who cares? It's not a Matthew Riley novel out there. The other reason for guys slowly passing the ball around is that one of the strategies currently employed by most teams is to maintain possession as much as possible. Obviously, this is no different in American football or why Russia is really good at hockey. The other team can't score when you have the ball. So teams will just pass the ball back and forth and even pass it back to their own goalie because it's better to go backwards with the ball than to maybe make a risky pass and let the other team have the ball. On occasion, you'll see a team make like 50 passes without the other team touching the ball, which can take a really long time, but then they'll go down and they'll score, and that's like as good as it gets. It's all about waiting for the precise moment for things to align and then all going together at the right moment.
It makes sense.
In terms of like positioning and formations, you'll usually have 3 or 4 numbers, like 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. These numbers will always add up to 10, and then the goalie is just assumed. Different positions include the center backs, who just stay as defenders, and then the full backs are both the left and the right back, who will defend, but then they'll also usually join the attack as well. And then we have midfielders, like a center midfielder, who can go both ways. a center attacking midfielder, or a center defending midfielder. And then up front, we have like a left wing and a right wing, sometimes a center forward, and a striker up front it's his job to just score goals.
Okay.
One thing I'll mention that makes it easy to kind of get into soccer is that you can legally watch some old matches on YouTube. This is unlike American sports. Like, why isn't there a website that I can go to watch any game, like an iTunes for sports? So, like, I can pay $2 to watch any game in history. Like, all these games are on tape somewhere. They exist. But I can't watch a game in the 1986 World Series unless an international pandemic shuts down the world and there's no sports. And they just happen to put it on NBC or something. Like, come on.
He's very right about that. With the way our sports system works over here in America, there's really not a lot of replay value. You can watch highlights, but finding full games, good luck with that, man.
So anyway, so keeping the ball and attacking is referred to as positive football. You're always trying to move forward. This is what most teams do. This is what people like to watch a little more. It's kind of exciting. It's more exciting to watch that way. But of course, there's always a yin to the yang. So the yin is this guy named Jose Mourinho. And he basically says, I don't want the ball. I'm going to stand back with my players in front of my goal, and you're not going to score. And then every once in a while, when you're falling asleep and all your players are up in my zone, we're going to steal the ball and we're going to run down and score, which sounds a little bit risky.
That makes sense.
Except that it actually does work if you do it well. Jose's considered one of the best managers there is, and he has the trophies to back it up. He's won plenty of big tournaments with teams that I'm told if you tried to have that team keep the ball the whole time, like most coaches would, they would have been destroyed. They were too old and they just would have got worn out and wiped out. But by playing this negative defensive strategy, they were able to win. And despite this, teams that employ this strategy seem to get a bad rap for playing negative as opposed to positive football, because keeping the ball seems to be the in thing right now. So obviously there's more thought that goes into it than I've described here. Like Diego Simeone and Atletico Madrid has been using this negative strategy for years, and they've been successful with it. On the flip side, the guys who've risen to the top playing possession football are also widely sought after. Two of the most well-known coaches right now are Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola, and I highly recommend.
I'm so sorry. I've heard his name so much. I've seen so much of him.
Klopp and Pep Guardiola, and I highly recommend watching the series All or Nothing about Manchester City on Amazon Prime. It's about
All or Nothing. Wait, I want to write that down actually. I'll take any opportunity I can to watch more documentaries.
Guardiola's team a few years ago, and it's quite clear from interviews with these guys that they're quite thoughtful and well-traveled. I couldn't name a single baseball manager who can speak 3 languages. So speaking of Manchester City, they play in England.
Right.
There are 4 main football countries in Europe. There's England, Spain, Germany, and Italy. England has the Premier League, Spain has La Liga, Germany has the Bundesliga, and Italy has Serie A. So to take one country, they're all the same, but to take one country, England, the Premier League consists of 20 teams.
Wait, I want to ask, is France's, what is it, League One, if I'm not mistaken? Are they not considered like one of the, like a part of this like infrastructure right here? Let me know in the comments. That actually kind of surprises me.
Take one country, England. The Premier League consists of 20 teams. Every team plays every other team, once at home and once away. And these leagues don't have playoffs. You get 3 points for a win, 1 for a tie. The team with the most points at the end of the season wins. And this can and has come down to the final day of the season before. In the U.S., our leagues pretty much have the same teams every year. So if you suck, and even if you start to lose on purpose, you actually get rewarded with the top draft pick the next year. If you finish in last place in one of these leagues, they literally kick you out of the league. But they call it relegation because that's a nicer sounding word.
We need relegation so badly in this sport because that's an issue that we have with a lot of our different leagues. There are no stakes for a lot of these lesser teams. Like, I'm a Browns fan because I was born in Cleveland, and when you're born in Cleveland, you are a diehard Browns fan whether you want to be it or not. Like, that's just the law. That's how it is. That's how it goes, right? Obviously, it's not the same sports culture on the level as like how things go in like football, but that's kind of our thing here. Problem is, the Browns suck. We've had maybe 1 or 2 good years, maybe in the last 15 years, where we were actually pretty okay. But the problem is, we don't have a relegation system because these are all franchise teams, so they have to be a part of it, whether they want to be or not. Same goes with the NBA. We've got teams that haven't done anything in 20, 30 years, but since it's a franchise system, they're a part of it. So yeah, I've heard rumors that we might be getting some kind of relegation system soon in the MLS. I hope that's the case, because that creates more competition, that encourages people to play better, and it'll more or less kind of hopefully draw back on the fact that we're kind of a retirement home for exceptionally previously good talent, you know. So I hope we do get a relegation system at some point. Kick things into shape, you know? And, you know, I've read a lot of comments that said since teams in, let's say like the Premier League, for example, they're not franchised, so they aren't like signed to the federation itself, or, you know, to the Premier League. They're not signed to it. They're, you know, they're a club, which is different from a franchise team. Franchise teams, because it works like this in esports, have contracts that willingly have them a part of the league, regardless of how good they do. It happens in Call of Duty. Counter-Strike is more like football, where you've got teams that can make it to tournaments and teams that can't. There is a relegation system, but that's what makes it exciting, because sometimes you have some of the best teams in the world do great, and sometimes they do worse. You have like a random top 50 team just come in and do something really cool. Now, obviously, that's not the same as football, like on a 1-to-1 scale, but I understand the relegation system and why it's important. It also creates more room for underdog stories too, which I think is also important for anything competitive. So that makes sense.
But they call it relegation because that's a nicer sounding word. Before we keep going, here's a quick aside on the MLS. Major League Soccer is the top league in the United States. It's different in many ways than the European leagues. There's no relegation, so the teams do stay the same from year to year, and there is a salary cap. Talent-wise, I guess globally speaking, it seems to be an okay league, but certainly not on par with any of the European leagues.
Mm-hmm.
So under the Premier League, which is at the top,
playoffs.
under them is a league called the English Football League Championship. The 3 teams who finish at the bottom of the Premier League are relegated to the championship for the next season and replaced by 3 teams from the championship. The bottom 3 teams in championship are relegated to League 1. The bottom 3 in League 1 are relegated to League 2, whose losers go to the National League, whose losers are... nobody really cares about them except their moms at this part. But
Okay, so what happens has there ever been a team that started off in the Premier League or any of these top tier leagues and got pushed all the way to National League and under? Has that ever happened before?
Losers are nobody really cares about them except their moms at this part, but you get the idea. Unless you really get into soccer, you'll never hear about anything below the Premier League again. But just so you're aware of what's happening down there. This system does a few things. First off, just because you're near the bottom of the standings, your games can still be extremely important. They still count because you're not trying to win the league anymore, but now you're trying to literally stay in the league.
Yeah,
and the higher the league you're in, the higher the check you get from TV contracts. So it's kind of a big deal. Oh. It also creates this kind of theoretical meritocracy where you could start a team with a bunch of guys anywhere in the country, get into a kind of a tiny league, and then ultimately work your way up to the Premier League. In reality,
that is something that a lot of you have explained to me in the comments before under a lot of videos about like how the structure of leagues work. And when you say they're literally clubs built from the ground up, you guys mean that. You guys mean that. Some people have jokingly said that some of these leagues were started by guys that worked in a factory. And I just kind of took that as, all right, you guys are just being silly, right? No, you're being very for real when you say that. That's crazy, like in a cool way.
And then ultimately work your way up to the Premier League. In reality, that'd be like trying to take a single A baseball team and work your way up to the majors, while the other better teams with bigger pocketbooks are trying to buy all your best players the whole way. But for the teams at the top, just winning the Premier League sounds pretty easy. You're playing maybe 1 game a week. But that's the catch. There's other things going on here. So there's also the Carabao Cup, which is a tournament open to the top 4 leagues in England. And then there's the FA Cup, which has been going on since like forever, that it's literally open to every like team in England. So over 700 teams entered this one tournament last year.
I've heard of that.
Imagine if every major and minor league baseball team had one giant.
Okay, wait. I want to read over all these, make sure I can, because I've heard a lot of these names. Like, I've heard of Copa del Rey. So, is it the same for all of these, I assume? I'm sure it's probably going to explain it some more. 4 best teams, because I think that's how that works for the Copa del Rey. Copa Italia, DFB Pokal. Okay. And then I've heard of some of these. I need to actually go and probably read up on some of these some more, but I've heard a lot of these and I've seen a lot of games from these particular like areas just by chance. Okay, that makes sense.
A minor league baseball team had one giant tournament. So could any team win? Yes, they could. Will the small teams upset the bigger teams? At some point, maybe a few will. But is it likely that a non-Premier League team is going to win? No, probably not. So more fun to think about in theory than practically, I guess.
Okay.
The final tournament is the big one. Like, what if we could find the best team in Europe? And I don't mean like each country gets a team. That's the European Championship. That happens every 4 years. This, I'm talking about the league clubs. So the best teams from all over Europe, from 55 different countries, battle it out each year. This is the UEFA Champions League.
Yep.
So as a side note on these acronyms here, FIFA is the organization that runs like big international tournaments like the World Cup, and they help to coordinate things across different regions.
Yep.
If you're an American, you probably heard of FIFA because somebody on SportsCenter mentioned somebody that was involved with some kind of corruption investigation or something. Anyway, within FIFA, the world is divided into 6 different regions. UEFA is Europe. That's where like the best players go. CONCACAF, you may have heard of because that's what the U.S. is in, the Confederation of North, Central American, and Caribbean Association Football.
Wow, I didn't know that's
short and sweet.
Wouldn't know that's what that
there's
actually
like the rest of the world. And each one of these...
So I'm just going to pause this because I want to read all these. All right, so I knew about CONCACAF, I knew about CONMEBOL, CAF, AFC. How competitive is this region? Because that's not a lot of... it's not a lot of countries. How competitive is this region? But yeah, I know about UEFA, I know about this, I know about this. Okay.
And each one of these groups has tournaments with national teams and their league clubs, like the CONCACAF Champions League and the UEFA Champions League. And these are called like the Champions League, but really it's just a tournament. So the UEFA Champions League is played in conjunction with the UEFA Europa League, which is kind of like the NCAA and NIT basketball tournaments, but with a bit of a twist. They play the qualifying rounds for the Champions League first. So if you get knocked out of the big boy tournament, but you finish high enough, you can just move down into the Europa League and try to win that. And I won't get into the qualifying, but typically you're going to have teams that you may have heard of as an American, like Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur. From Spain, they'd probably be Barcelona and Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. Serie A from Italy will have Juventus and Inter and Roma and Atalanta. Germany is pretty much dominated by Borussia Dortmund and Bayern Munich.
Okay.
And then there's other popular teams like Paris Saint-Germain from France and Lyon from France and Ajax from the Netherlands. And then you throw in a few Russian teams and you're ready to party. So back to the Premier League. You remember how your team's playing that kind of standard 38-game schedule. So now, also at the same time, you're competing in the Premier League, the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. And there's like a bunch of other small one-off games happening too.
So I've heard about the one-off games, like the 1v1s, like some of the oh man, there's been some like games that are like for an actual trophy, and it's between like the top team of like one league versus the top team of like another. So it's like the top team of like the Premier League versus like the top team of like the tier 2 English league or something like that. I forget what those are called, but I'm pretty certain that's what that is, if I'm not mistaken. But I have always thought it's crazy how many different leagues a lot of these teams will participate in throughout an entire season, you know? And not every team will be in the Champions League or Europa League. So that makes sense.
Carabao Cup, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. And there's like a bunch of other small one-off games happening too. So even if you have the best team, you're still probably not going to win all these tournaments just because of the wear and tear. If you can win 3 trophies in a year, that's like special. That's called a treble. If you win 4, that's called a quadruple, but that's pretty rare. And
hey, shout out Barcelona and PSG because they did that last year, didn't they? PSG won 3 different tournaments. Also, shout out Dembele for winning the Ballon d'Or. I think it's criminal that Rafinha was 5th though. That's insane. I thought that was nuts. I genuinely thought Rafinha should have been up there instead of Lamine Yamal personally, and I love Lamine Yamal, but him being fifth was wild. Anyway, yeah. So that's called a treble. So PSG and Barca, they won 3 sets of trophies last season because PSG won the Champions League. What else did PSG win? I don't know what else they won. I think they won their own domestic cup too, and then one other thing, right? And then they got second in that really weird final in the FIFA Club World Cup that we won't probably ever talk about again.
If you can win 3 trophies in a year, that's like special. That's called a treble. If you win 4, that's called a quadruple, but that's pretty rare. And so the biggest payday is for winning your league, although I, for some reason, find the Champions League is hard to beat for excitement. So yeah, even though you can, soccer teams tend to trade players less than they do in the U.S. Rather, teams will just buy players from their current club. So a contract is going to include your salary, obviously, but also something called a release clause, which is a fee that would go to the current club for that player. So while any team could negotiate a transfer fee with a player's current club, a release clause takes that current team just out of negotiations altogether. So a baseball player, unhappy with the situation, he could demand a trade, and they might trade him and he'd be happy. But if they refuse to trade him, then he's kind of stuck. Whereas a soccer player could just find another team willing to pay that release clause. And once a team agrees to pay the clause, then they can just negotiate directly with that player. Obviously, the better player, the higher the fee is going to be, so the current club can go out and find a reasonable replacement. Another big difference is that while most sports in the U.S. have a trade deadline, and that's followed by a few weeks afterward where players cannot move to another team, soccer's kind of the opposite. So most of the time you cannot move to another team. There are 2 periods a year called transfer windows that you can move during. So usually before and then halfway through the season.
I actually really need to pause so I can read this because I've been wondering about that for a while. Because I've been seeing a lot of the different transfers and whatever that have been going on throughout the entirety of this, like the start of this season. And I always wonder, like, when does this actually end? But yeah, I guess it doesn't technically really ever fully end. You know, it's always going to be kind of like consistently, like, because we've had a lot of transfers recently for a lot of different teams. But yeah, I was just curious, like, when does this actually stop? Because I kept getting notifications every other day. This player's getting transferred. This one's getting transferred. So
you could sign a new contract for another team whenever, but you can't actually start playing for them until that next transfer window.
Okay.
And the last thing in terms of contracts is that in the U.S., most leagues have a draft, but soccer is pretty much like the Wild West. So teams will sign players, or I should say kids, like into their youth academy very young, like 10, 8 years old. And smaller teams who find a really good player could also include something called a sell-on clause when selling a player to a larger team that says if the team buying that player turns around and sells the player again to an even bigger club, then that original team will get a percentage of that secondary sale.
That makes sense.
All right, so if you're still here at this point, you probably want more. So what's next? There are like an unlimited number of top or best goal compilations on YouTube, which are kind of interesting in the sense that you can actually show, new people to soccer, the potential that the game has. Lots of Americans' exposure to soccer is like the Women's World Cup, and obviously we have a great team there, but you never really get to see what different strategies look like. Like, look up Barcelona tiki-taka videos. You won't regret that. They make grown men look like children. As I mentioned, the All or Nothing series on Man City is great if you have Amazon Prime. And obviously just watching games is good. FIFA TV has a YouTube channel that has lots of international matches. Or just look on YouTube for full football matches. You're smart, you'll find them. UEFA TV has old Champions League matches. I think you might have to register, but it's free. You'll probably want to follow BR's football channel on YouTube. They have a lot of good stuff, including this very funny series called The Champions, which I'd probably wait a little bit until you learn a little more about the top players before watching that.
Okay.
One place I always turn to when trying to learn a new sport is video games. So FIFA would probably help. Although the big caveat there is that it has horrible reviews. That said, if you're just trying to learn the rules, like basic tactics and which players are on which teams and who plays.
Like the microtransactions in FIFA, it's like a lot of other sports games, man. That's why I don't really get into them. I don't like the microtransactions. I don't like paying for basically the same sports game every single year. Like, I've thought about getting FIFA, but I want to hear your opinions on if I should actually put time and effort into that or not.
To learn the rules, like basic tactics and which players are on which teams and who plays where, I would say it's been pretty helpful for me. Most of the negativity toward the game is for the online, the FIFA Ultimate Team mode, where you end up paying for players for your team. But if you just avoid that and then like stick to playing against the AI, then you should be okay. The only thing I hesitate to do is play as Barcelona, because you can control Leo Messi, and like, who am I to tell God what to do? So I usually avoid that part. The alternative here, it would be a game called PES, which I've heard good things about, although it doesn't have licensing for many of the teams. So jerseys will look different and team names will be slightly off, which I guess might be confusing to someone new. And I think FIFA's player faces are a bit more recognizable too. News-wise, there's coverage like everywhere of soccer, although I do enjoy the site onefootball.com, which brings us to the sponsor of today's video, which is, there's no sponsor for today's video. I just make these videos to push the boundaries of PowerPoint and see how mad I can make myself. Anyway, hopefully that helps somewhat. You're now ready to venture off beyond the coasts of the United States and become an even bigger soccer fan. Just if you're leaving the U.S., call it football. They get mad if you call it soccer. Anyway, good luck. Thanks for watching.
All right, that was a really helpful video. I want to keep track of, I'm going to look at this after I'm done recording this, but I'm going to check out some of these different pages and websites and channels to kind of look up some extra things. I'm not going to play, what is it called? PES? If it's, granted, this is an old video. This is a 5-year-old, probably going on 6-year-old, 5-year-old video. So I'm not going to play something that has wrong names and whatever. That's just going to be weird. that Messi joke is funny considering now we're in 2025 and it's an entirely different era. This was a very helpful video. I learned a lot more about like the basic rules and some other things too. I knew about the different leagues, the tier 2 side of things, tier 3, tier 4, but I definitely think I'm going to watch a few more videos like kind of breaking down some of these leagues to their fullest, so I still have a better clear-cut understanding. But it does kind of feel reassuring to know that a lot of this information that I read here and saw and listened to today, some of it, a good chunk of it, I'm like, damn, I know this. So we're getting up there. We're improving our knowledge base for football. But anyway, guys, thanks for suggesting this video for me to react to. We learned a lot more today about how football is structured and how it works, and I will definitely be reacting to more informational pieces like this. If you enjoyed this reaction video, leave a comment down below, and if you have something else that you want me to react to, leave a comment under my pinned comment in the comments down below. I've said comments like 8 times. But anyway, thanks for watching this video, boy Jay. I hope I catch you in the next video. I hope you have a great day too. Peace.